Welcome to the Creepy Oz Halloween Mega Collab 2022. Featuring over 25 spooky tales, narrated by Ozzy and friends. Grab the popcorn, get cozy, and prepare to get spooky. Halloween Ghost, narrated by Creepy Oz.
It was Halloween evening, or the day before. I was around 7 or 8, so I can't remember fully. I'm 18 now. I was standing in my living room with my friends and my brothers. There were 5 of us all watching out the window, out toward the porch. Again, memory is extremely foggy, and this has changed over time as my twin and I have recalled it. It was very dark, around 9 in the evening, when we saw a blue, glowing figure floating up the road. I always remember seeing like a classic cartoon ghost, like one you would see in Mario. But a part of me also remembers an old 17th century man wearing nightwear. I think this is because that's what my brother also saw, and it has changed my perception of what I saw over the years. Anyway, this thing, it walked or floated up the road for about 10 meters and then vanished behind a street light. We were baffled. The weird thing is that I can't remember before or after, just when we saw it. I've tried to ask the others about it in the past, but they've seemed dismissive. Maybe they've forgotten. Maybe they don't want to remember. Me and my twin brother, we still remember it clearly, and it shakes us up every time we speak about it. It seems like only the 2 of us remember this. It was the only paranormal experience I've ever had in my life, and it made me actually believe.
What my girlfriend hid in her apartment. Narrated by Dr. Creepen.
For the majority of my adult life, I had been alone. I was quite introverted, so I wanted it to be that way. I had the same routine of waking up, showering, and eating a quick slice of bland toast before making the commute to my lackluster 9-to-5 job. My weekends were spent alone as well, usually at home reading or browsing the internet. I didn't have the desire to go out to bars and parties, let alone communicate with the few friends I had. That was all until I met Ellie. Ironically, we met at a party. One of the few friends that I did have insisted that I show up to this and claimed it would be fun. I reluctantly agreed and soon found myself at a party that I wish I never would have gone to. I played the role of the typical wallflower, hiding in the corner with a plastic cup in my hand. I'd never particularly had a taste for alcohol, but everyone was insisting that I have a drink and relax a little. Whatever. I thought I'd be standing alone in the corner all night, but I was surprised as a very attractive-looking girl made her way over to me. I was wondering why in the hell someone who I presumed to actually have a life wanted to come mingle with me. Her eyes were a piercing, frosty blue, made to stand out by her dark eyeshadow and blood-red lips. Her outfit showed a lot of pale skin, with jet black hair tumbling down her back. I had no words as she simply plucked the plastic cup from my hands and took a long swig, swiping her tongue over her full lips before discarding the cup. "What's your name, honey?" she asked in a seductive, almost rasp of a voice. She casually leaned up against the wall, twirling her hair around a long, pale finger. I told her my name was Sarah, and that's how it all started. We talked for hours as the guests began to thin out or just simply pass out. She told me that her name was Ellie, and wrote her phone number down for me on my arm before flouncing away through the remaining guests. I was glad to end up with a pretty girl's number, but I had no idea how long it would take for the permanent marker ink to wash from my forearm. Over the next few months, Ellie and I began to build a relationship. She helped me emerge from my shell, and I became a person that I never thought I could. We frequented bars and clubs, and she was an absolutely amazing chef. We were a few months into the relationship when it dawned on me that I'd never actually been to Ellie's house before. She always came to my place, and only vaguely talked about where she lived. I decided to bring up the topic, to which she simply stated that she didn't know I wanted to come over to her place. I thought it was a bit odd, but we made plans for me to come over the next weekend. It makes my stomach churn just thinking about it now. When she first unlocked the door and led me inside, my nostrils were hit with an odd smell. It wasn't any sort of food or something rotten, but it was just odd. She had me sit down on the sofa as she started cooking dinner. Her apartment was clean, but my eyes focused on a large garbage bag leaned against the wall. Upon closer inspection, the odd smell seemed to be coming from that bag. Before I could move any further, Ellie abruptly entered the room, making me jump. She briefly went wide-eyed before making her way over to me. "Tomorrow is garbage day. I just haven't gotten around to putting it out in the bin," she said, a hint of nervousness creeping into her voice. I just simply nodded my head and let the idea slip from my mind as we ate dinner and the night gloriously slipped by. I went home probably feeling the happiest I've ever been, dreaming about the next time I would get to see her. If only I knew what was in store for me. The second time I entered Ellie's apartment was a week later. It was the same as last time, except I could no longer smell that strange odor. The garbage bag was gone too, and I simply figured she'd taken it out to the trash before I'd come over. We were having a lovely evening, before Ellie realized that she'd left her phone at work. She told me to sit tight while she drove back and got it. Not long after she left was when shit really hit the fan. I was seated on the couch, enjoying a glass of wine. The whole apartment was quiet, until a sudden, loud thud nearly made me jump out of my skin. I just shrugged it off as someone else in the apartment next door, until I heard it again and again. It sounded like it was coming from the bedroom, which I had only briefly seen. I decided to investigate, which I now know was a big mistake. I opened the door to the bedroom and was hit by that strange odor again. But this time, it was a whole lot stronger than when I'd last smelled it. I surveyed the room, looking for anything out of place. I spotted a small black piece of plastic poking out from underneath the bed. I crouched down to my knees and decided to try pulling at it. I began to tug at the plastic, but it was surprisingly heavy. I pulled as hard as I could until there was a bulky, large garbage bag sitting in front of me. The strange odor filled the entire room now, and it was nauseating. Before I could do anything else, the bag began to move. I quickly jumped to my feet as fear began to course through my body. I stared in horror as the bag continued moving, and Lord knows what could have prepared me for what happened next. The bag suddenly ripped open, and I was greeted by the face of what I thought to be a man. His hair was scraggly and matted to his face in filthy clumps. His eyes were dull and seemed to have no life in them, while his lips were cracked and dry as a sign of major dehydration. I watched in horror as he began to slowly crawl out of the bag, revealing an emaciated body covered in bruises. His feet were missing, which I later figured out had been cut off to prevent him escaping the hell he was in. He slowly crawled towards me, heavily grunting like a diseased animal. I turned away and vomited, too disgusted at what I'd seen. I backed away, painstakingly, inches at a time, as my body was stiff with fear. To my absolute horror, the thing scrambled forward and began lapping the vomit up greedily. I let out a horrified shriek before running for my life towards the front door. I nearly ran into Ellie, who had a shocked, confused grin on her face. I shoved my way past her and fled from that wretched place. I never talked to Ellie again, and isolated myself from social interaction for a long time. I was too afraid to date again, thinking that I would come face to face with more grotesque horrors. I still have nightmares to this very day about what I saw in that bedroom. I'm always afraid that some creature will come crawling from underneath my bed to attack me. But the thing that haunts me most is that if I had just stuck around a few minutes more, I would have ended up just like that man in the bag.
Where Do You Live? Narrated by J Nightmares.
This happened last October, when I was on my way home from a drinking night with my work colleagues. I caught the last train home, and I arrived at my station as it came up to 1 a.m. It was Halloween, something I didn't particularly care about, since we don't really do much for it here in Japan. I live in quite a rural area, so the station was empty, or so I thought. As I walked down towards the ticket gate, I saw a woman in a costume. A bit too old to be a trick-or-treater, I thought, as I drew closer to her. She was wearing a witch costume. She looked as if she was waiting for someone. At the moment I passed her, she abruptly called out to me, "Where do you live?" I continued walking. It was surreal. I just looked over my shoulder. She was stood there, staring at me. She had long, dark, messy hair, and I remember at the time only one of her eyes were visible through her hair. Yeah, that freaked me out. It was really bright in the underground station, but she seemed to bring a bit of darkness to it. I don't know how else to explain it, but it felt like there was a light out above her head, where there wasn't. Don't get involved, don't respond, I told myself, as I upped my pace and headed out the exit. It takes about 15 minutes to get home from the station on foot, and at that time of night in my rural area, I knew there would be no one on the streets. It made me a little nervous. While I was walking home, I heard a dog howling, and my footsteps seemed to echo behind me. I kept looking over my shoulder. I turned a corner to see someone stood underneath a streetlight, a silhouette of a woman. I wanted to pass by quickly. Something was really off about tonight. First time I've ever been worried on Halloween. "Where do you live?" a familiar voice asked. Shivers raced up and down my spine. It was the woman in the Halloween costume from the station. I looked back, and she took a step towards me, and I just bolted. I ran, checking over my shoulder, as fast as I could. I ran out of breath and got a stitch. Too many goddamn beers. I had to stop. I was in a dark alley. I looked back. I couldn't see that woman anymore. I walked down the alley, relieved. "Where do you live?" I froze in place. What the hell was happening? I was shaking. I couldn't see her at all this time. I didn't even hear her coming. It sounded as if she was directly above me. I spun around in all directions. I was really panicking now. I shut my eyes for a second, and when I opened them, I saw her slowly walking towards me. "Where do you live?" Why? Why is this happening? My legs were trembling, even though I was still drunk. I've never felt like that before or since. I didn't know what to do. She wouldn't leave me alone, and if I walked home, she would surely follow me. So I just pointed to a random house across the street from the alley and blurted out, "There! I live there!" The woman in the costume turned her head slowly towards the house I was pointing at, and then smiled. She looked back at me one last time, still smiling, and then back towards the house. With this strange woman distracted, I took my opportunity and ran for it again. I looked over my shoulder to see if she was following me, but she was stood still, staring at the house I pointed at. She was so creepy. Was this some kind of Halloween prank? I had no idea, but I didn't want to find out. I got home and I triple-checked all the doors and windows were locked. I stayed up half the night, watching from the window to see if the woman was out there, but I didn't see her. Time went by, but I couldn't forget about this strange experience. I can't really remember her face. My memory's a little bit hazy. I got shivers every now and then when I thought about that night. A few weeks after the incident, on a Sunday, I was taking a walk with my daughter in the neighborhood, and I noticed a moving truck. The truck was parked outside the house I pointed at. "Where do you live?" I remembered that woman's voice, and I shuddered. I thought to myself at the time, it's a coincidence. The people who live there are just moving out, but I wondered if something happened to them that made them want to move out. The owners of the house came out holding boxes. They looked exhausted and miserable. I guess something could have happened. In the house, I saw the silhouette of a woman. No, couldn't be that woman, could it? It could. I just couldn't be sure. I grabbed my child's hand and started to walk away. I don't go anywhere near that house now.
Shadows in My Dreams. Narrated by Creepypasta.
The first dream was a month ago. My school was putting on a Halloween play. When I woke up, I had "This is Halloween" stuck in my head. In this play, a hearse was supposed to go by at one point. A bunch of freaky-looking dead people and ghosts were supposed to pop up as it passed the audience. They were all covered by hay for some reason. My friend, Mike, was supposed to be a hat man, which was easy for him because he was always wearing a fedora. As we were walking down to the hearse, across the stage, the room was really dark, with only the stage lights on. We could see his shadow on the wall. When we were almost to the hearse, the shadow of his hat came up next to another shadow of a hat on the wall. But this one belonged to a real shadow man. My sister was calm, and Mike freaked out. That was when I woke up. Now, when I had this dream, the lights in my room were actually off, and when I woke up, I remember seeing something on the wall before turning on my lights. I've heard some people say that if you see shadow people in your dreams, then there could be one actually watching you as you sleep. It was around 3 to 4ish when I woke up, which is a time when many sightings of hat men or shadow people are reported. The second dream, this was more recent. Basically, my sister and I were in a motel, and every time we'd try to go outside, there were just more hallways filled with mist. Occasionally, strange shadows would pass along the walls. My sister had to drive our van and ended up crashing it into a room where a girl was being roasted. As soon as she died, a bunch of shadow children started creeping along the wall, and as soon as they disappeared, a larger shadow person appeared, which I assumed was their parent. The wall they were walking on, it was sunny. When I woke up from this dream, it was 5 a.m. I'm still really obsessed and fascinated with shadow people like before, in the past story I wrote. The only time I ever sleep with my lights off is with my girlfriend. and even then, I feel very uneasy looking at the dark wall. I also keep an iPod charger plugged in at all times, so when it's dark, it creates a patch of light on the wall across my bed. When I'm alone, I don't like to have my back to that wall because it feels very empty. Yet, in a way, that I believe something is watching me and out to get me. Could they be in my room, watching me as I sleep?
Home Alone on Halloween Night. Narrated by Papa Scare.
Home Alone on Halloween Night. You know how you always look forward to staying at home alone with no family to bother you? But what happens if you do see something that scares the living daylights out of you? Well, that definitely happened to me. Every Thursday night, my brother, sister and father go out and play music at a restaurant down the street. But a few months ago, on Halloween of all nights, the whole family went down to play and I stayed home to chill. It was 8:30 p.m. when I went out to our enclosed veranda to wait for my mother to come and collect me for dinner. But while I was waiting, I saw something move outside slowly, and at first, I thought it was the wind. But then I saw it again. It was about 6 feet tall, triangle like hands, no face, and a lot darker than the night. I still thought it was nothing until it happened to move more frequently, and I got more and more scared, so I ran inside. I thought my mother was going to come home soon, so I grabbed hold of my bravery and went outside. I walked up and down the veranda and noticed a piece of metal in one of the rose bushes that is right up to the glass. Once again, I got scared and ran back inside. I still thought my mother was going to be back, so I went out again and noticed that the piece of metal was gone. You could tell that it was taken away as the bush was moving, but everything else was still. I was still seeing the thing walking around the house. I decided to count the seconds it would take for the thing to come back. I noticed that it was not just one, but 3 or 4. It took my family much longer to come home than I expected. But what my elder brother said really shook me. He told me that as he was walking home, he saw a dark figure on the roof, peering into my bedroom skylight. That night, I slept against the wall, traumatized, with only my cat to comfort me. The next day, we discovered that they were probably shadow people, and that they might have been around for a few weeks as the atmosphere outside had changed after a week or two. This night has changed everything, and I will never be alone in a house. And if I am, I will be nowhere near a window.
There is a girl in the basement. Narrated by Depth Zero.
If you have ever babysat, you have a scary story, and I think mine wins. This one story still haunts me to this day. Halloween night, 2013. I was working as a babysitter in my local area. I was probably 15 or 16 when this happened. I talked to many therapists after this, and they all told me the same thing. It would take me a while to get over this, something I could have figured out on my own, but I suppose they gave me a few tricks to get me back to what? Normal? How could anyone be normal after this? Anyway, I went to this young girl's house. I think she was about 9. Everything was going fine until about 8 o'clock. She asked me for some ice cream, and her mum had told me she was allowed some earlier that night. Fine, I get up down to the basement where they kept a freezer as their kitchen was quite small. I glanced up at the window they had at the top. It was the sort of window that if you're looking at the house from the outside, it would be on the bottom of the house. It was angled down slightly so anything in it looked to be staring at me. I take a step back when I see a young girl's face. I feel fear run through me, but it looks like a mask. As I said, Halloween night, it was probably just some stupid kids messing about, so I go and grab the ice cream, still a little shaken up. I didn't want to scare the girl I was babysitting, so I just kept this to myself and would go back down and check before calling the police. Looking back, that was the most stupid idea I ever had. I bring the girl I'm babysitting a bowl of ice cream, and then she looks at me with a sorrow look. "Could I have some sprinkles?" she says with a hint of sadness in her voice. The old puppy dog eyes. I sigh and head back down the stairs and look at the window again. In hindsight, this whole thing could have been avoided if the family just kept the sprinkles upstairs. But I look at the window and the girl's still there. I'm getting annoyed and decide I'll go back up and discreetly contact her mum or maybe the police. I get back upstairs and the girl I'm babysitting looks like she's about to say something before we hear a loud thud come from down the stairs in the basement. I look at the girl and calmly say, "Stay here, I think something fell." She complies and I speed walk to the door, phone in hand, ready to call 911. I can't stop myself from running over to the window to see if maybe they'd shattered it. Then I hear a blood-curdling scream come from upstairs. I turn around and sprint quickly back upstairs and I'm met with a horrific sight. The girl is face first in her ice cream, a stab mark in the back of her head and the front door wide open. The police and parents get here, so do my parents. I'm crying uncontrollably, which is understandable. I begin to tell the police everything, and when I get to the bit about the window, her mum looks at me, white as snow. She then says the words that still appear in my nightmares to this day. "Honey, we don't have a window in our basement. The planners wouldn't let us. What you saw is..." She pauses before the next phrase leaves her mouth. "A mirror."
A Kid from Amityville. Narrated by Creepypasta.
Being born on Halloween in Amityville, New York, probably sounds very spooky. I was around long before the Amityville horror debacle, and being born on Halloween maybe helped. I get the most psychic around October every year. It started as a child, when I knew who was on the other end of the phone when it rang. My best friend got sent away when we were both 7 years old. When I was 9, one day, I woke up and I just knew he was back. There was not a doubt in my mind. I got on my bike and I rode to his house, and there he was, sitting on the steps. I never thought to myself, how did I know? It was just something that I remembered years later. I always felt spirits in my room at night. I could feel someone sit on my bed, and I would jump up to find nobody there. I insisted on sleeping with the light on for this reason. My grandmother never liked me. She blamed me for the reason my parents split up. After she was put in a nursing home and my parents got back together, I was given her room with the same bed. After we went to the wake, I went to bed. I saw her, clear as day, over my bed, with a little blonde baby in her arms. She had lost a baby at 18 months in 1917 due to influenza. I didn't know at the time. She told me to get out of bed, and she was not very nice about it. It scared the crap out of me, and I refused to sleep in that room anymore. We moved upstate when I was 14. The house we moved to, it was 200 years old. The first night that I went to bed and did turn the light out, I could just feel things invading my bedroom, all trying to talk to me at once. Again, I was very frightened. I turned the light on after that, and if anyone shut it off while I was sleeping, I would wake up because of all the chatter in my room. I would jump up and turn on the light to make it go away.
The Van on Halloween. Narrated by Darek Weber. Scary Stories.
This story is so cliche and ridiculous that no one ever believes it's real except for the people that were there. It was Halloween 2012, my senior year of high school. I went to a Catholic school, so we always had the day off after Halloween because it's considered a church holy day. So my friends were game to start our weekend early. On nights where we didn't go to parties, we usually do the same thing. We'd sit on my front steps for a couple of hours and joke around, then we would walk the neighborhood and usually end up at this crappy pizza place across town because the prices were so cheap. Since a few of us had recently broken up with our girlfriends, we weren't in much of a party mood, so we did our usual. It's around 10 or 10:30 at night, and the pizza joint is closing up. There were 3 of us, me, my friend Pat, and my friend Jack. We finish our food, refill our drinks, and we head out. To get back to my house, we had to cross this large mall parking lot that's about 4 football fields long and maybe 2 wide. I should mention at this point that we aren't dumb, naive kids. We all had grown up in the city and had our fair share of urban experiences. All 3 of us were pretty streetwise and were competent out on the street by ourselves, but we experienced something this night that we were totally unprepared for. So, we're walking through this parking lot and it's absolutely desolate, not a soul in sight. And suddenly, we see a white tradesman van creeping slowly behind us about 100 yards back. I know, the old white van cliche, but I swear, this is really happening. I point it out to my friends and we pick up our pace. We pop the collars on our jackets and hunch our shoulders to make us seem a little bit bigger than we are. In an instant, the van speeds up and cuts off our path. Everything in the van is pitch black, so we can't see any people. That's when someone calls out in a non-threatening voice, "Hey man, happy Halloween. You guys like Halloween?" Despite the jovial manner in which this was said, a van doesn't just cut you off in a parking lot unless it has very bad intentions. We had nowhere to go. We could run, but they're in a van. They could catch up to us too easily and we'd have our backs turned to them. He says it again. "Hey man, you guys like Halloween?" I respond trying to sound tough. "Yeah, but it's over now, so we're heading home and you're in our way." "No, dude, Halloween ain't over. We still got tons of candy in here." The tone suddenly shifted, and still we can't see anyone in the van. The 3 of us puff out our chests and get ready for a fight. After a brief silence that felt like it dragged on for hours, Jack cuts the tension by sternly saying, "Listen, I don't know what you think you're about to do, but if you don't leave, we're going to kick your ass." Once he said that, the back door of the van swung open, and 2 very tall men stepped out. They had on black suits with black leather gloves and were well built and strong looking. But the most menacing thing was that they were both wearing these cheap Mitt Romney masks. That's when we realized this wasn't just a Halloween prank. At that moment, all 3 of us just went to take off, but the van started driving circles around us. There was no place for us to go. We had no idea how we were going to get out of this situation. And I have no idea what these guys were planning to do with 3 18-year-old men, but they seemed like they knew what they were doing, and we were all getting ready for the fight of our lives. The van stopped, and it looked like they were about to make their move. This was it. I mentioned that there were 3 of us that night. It was at this moment that my other friend, Pat, the one that had stayed silent up to this point, leaned into both of us and quietly said, "This is our Hail Mary. Get ready to run when I say go, all right?" He then picked up one of our sodas and threw it with all his might at the driver's side window. The window was open and the cup miraculously connected with the driver's head. Pat screamed, "Run!" and we took off across the parking lot. The van squealed off in the other direction, and we hurried our butts home. Jack and I were both confused as to why a simple cup of soda got them to give up on their plans. Then we found out what actually happened. While we were panicking, Pat kept his cool. He nonchalantly dumped out his drink and slipped a big-ass rock into his cup. Then he waited for the right moment. The driver, thinking that this kid had just thrown a drink at him, wound up getting pegged in the head with a rock. It probably knocked him out cold, or it at least bought us enough time to put some distance between us. All that was left after that was pulling off a miracle and getting the rock to hit. Maybe a guardian angel or God himself took care of that for us. I'm still amazed by it. The moral of the story: don't panic when you're in a tight spot. If you lose your cool, you lose the fight.
Night Supervisor. Narrated by Booze and Booze.
I was a newly hired staff nurse in one of the biggest hospitals in Quezon City when this happened to me. It was my first night on the 5th floor of the hospital, and it was on Halloween, as me and my other coworkers go about our routine during the night shift. We were just joking around and making fun of one another when our conversation turned to the paranormal since it was Halloween. My senior nurse told me that there's a ghost roaming around our floor, and that it was the ghost of one of our supervisors who had passed away years before I was even hired. I shrugged the notion of it away and went on to do what was assigned to me. As the night went on, my senior nurse decided to take a break inside of our lounge, probably to doze off for a while. Before she went on break, she reminded me about the patient census to be given to the supervisor ahead of her. I gave her a nod since I was busy writing my notes for the night. It was 3 a.m. I was still busy writing my notes when a woman in uniform approached our station and asked about the census. I answered back, giving only a glance since I knew she worked there too. Then I went on with my work. When my senior nurse asked me if someone came about the census, I said yes, and then she asked who called. With confusion written all over my face, I said no one called. A supervisor came up to the station and asked for it. I can still remember how her face turned white when she told me that someone was the ghost of the dead supervisor she had told me about earlier.
Halloween Pranksters. Narrated by Creepypasta.
This story begins when I was a child, probably about 7 years old. My mum and aunts threw a huge Halloween party for all the kids in the family. I think there were 16 of us at the time, ranging in age from probably 5 to 13 or so. It was awesome, but the coolest part came about the time it just got really dark. We took a hayride to the cemetery a few miles down the road from my aunt and uncle's, where the party was being held. My mum told us about some of the people buried there and how some of them were not resting in peace. Typical urban legend stuff. When we got there, the adults said that they wanted to show us the grave of an old man whose ghost was seeking revenge for his wrongful death. We were all scared and excited, creeping through the cemetery in the dark towards the largest tombstone. When we were about halfway there, my dad and uncles hopped up from behind the graves wearing scary masks. The kids all screamed and ran for the wagon, while all the ghosts and mums all laughed. For years, the adults retold this story, laughing over the details of our panicked faces and terrified attempts to get away. When I was a teenager, my sister and 2 of my cousins, we decided to get our mums back for this prank. Our parents got together once a month to play cards, so that October, we made sure we were around for card night. We waited until our fathers went for the inevitable beer run, which meant an hour or two at the bar. We told our mums about a legend we had heard about a sad ghost that could be seen weeping at her husband's grave when the moonlight hit just right. We had made this story up, of course. We convinced them to take us to see it. My cousin secretly called in his best friend, who had agreed to go there in a mask and hide around to scare them. The prank worked perfectly, and our mothers nearly peed themselves. We all laughed as we went back to our car. When we got in our car, it would not start. We laughed a bit more about the ghost sabotaging it and decided to walk to where my cousin's friend had hidden his car. We would send our dads to get the car later. But, of course, his car would not start either. We started to feel a little bit weird about this because neither car had had any problems recently. But what could we do? This was years before everyone had cell phones, so we started walking towards the closest house, which was still about a mile or two away. Though none of us knew them very well, we knew the family name of the people who lived there. As we walked up their long driveway, we started to worry because there were no cars parked by the house and it looked pretty dark inside. We knocked anyway, but we got no answer. We were just about to leave, not having nearly as much fun thinking we would have to walk the long distance to the next house, when we heard voices coming from the back of the house. We went to the backyard, looking for the people we heard, but it was very dark. No one was around. We yelled out, "Hello?" a few times and identified ourselves, but we got no answer. The backyard had a fair amount of trees, and suddenly, large branches just randomly started falling. This scared us, since there was no apparent cause. In just a few seconds, at least a dozen branches, bigger than your arm, fell from the 5 or 6 trees closest to us. We all ran for it. When we were around the end of the driveway, my cousin screamed and pointed towards the house. It looked like several pairs of eyes were peering around the house at us. Just eyes, all red. We ran straight back to our car and tried it again. This time, it started no problem. We did not stop at my cousin's friend's car. We went right back to the house. Later that night, my uncle and dad and cousin took his friend back and got his car, which also started on the first try. When they drove past that house, it looked completely normal, and there was a car in the driveway. We've never been sure if the people there saw us mucking around in the graveyard and decided to prank the pranksters, or if it was something else. If it was a prank, they put it together very fast and never laughingly confessed.
Halloween in the Philippines. Narrated by Miss Creepy Tales.
This is about 2 incidents that happened on Halloween. First was way back a couple of years ago. It was believed in our culture that on Halloween's Eve or All Saints' Day, the souls of the departed would visit the houses of living relatives, mostly in the forms of big moths and other unusual insects. Many will prepare food and other favorites, like candles, and offer prayers, especially those who prefer to stay in the house. In my case, I was outside of our house then, preparing the candles, while the other members of the family are inside. So, I lit 5 candles just near our main door, and I was just sitting next to it. Moments later, I saw the flames of the candles grow and then burn sideways, like it was being blown. Yes, being blown by somebody. All of the 5 candles. I was shocked, silently staring at it for a minute, and I'm sure that it's not the wind, because it's a little humid at that time, and after it rained in the late afternoon, the leaves of the trees are still, and nobody else was also around. The blowing still continues, and before I could think of anything else, I ran outside the gate, out to the streets with the other people. In a split second of a moment, I was totally scared, deeply panting. And then minutes later, my father called me to get inside to eat. Just when I look at the candles again, it was back on its normal flames and almost half burnt already. I told them about it, but nobody believed me. The second experience happened when I was already married. Also, it was the same occasion, and I was outside at our small porch lighting candles while carrying my youngest son. I can clearly see the people inside the house since they turned on all of the lights. We had our dinner early, so my wife was already upstairs with our eldest son. I can see our maid finishing her chores at the kitchen, and my father at the living room watching TV. Our kitchen is just across a couple of steps from our bathroom. Anybody from the bathroom or kitchen, going or coming from, can really be seen. So, I was still outside enjoying the breeze when I saw someone, a woman. I really did see her passing from the bathroom going to the kitchen clearly. Still, I could see her back when I called our maid. "Ging, pagngaon niya ang suga sa kusina." Which means, "Gang, turn off the lights at the kitchen after." Which to my surprise, she answered through the window upstairs saying, "Wala pa ko nahuman, kuya." Which means, "I'm not yet finished, kuya." Immediately, I felt shivers down my back, and I called my father asking if anybody is in the kitchen. Maybe it was my mother. To which he said, nobody. I hurriedly went inside the house and went up to our room and told my wife, and she said to just keep quiet about it. Later she told me she had also seen her, the same female figure, passing through our fence, but didn't pass through the wall.
The Pub That Time Forgot. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria.
Out in the outback, there are a variety of small ghost towns that have been or are nearly abandoned. I know one, like the town I used to live in. It was settled during one of the gold rushes, only to be abandoned soon after. And I love going back there. That pub has a special place in my heart. The owners are the descendants of the founder, and stayed on caring for it until they passed away, without any children to carry on the legacy, leaving the place to be abandoned. There were some locals and out-of-town people who tried to come and make it work, but they never did. They always left some unfinished renovations, made their apologies, and tried to leave as soon as they could. The pub is haunted with ghosts. Before you say anything, no, there was no tourist draw card for the locals to lie about. All of a sudden there would be music, lights, and the sound of people having a good time. New residents and tourists are always disturbed about it, but the locals are never too bothered. From midnight to 3 a.m. is when the ghosts are most active. The old bartender will tell you a yarn about how the town was settled. And countless people were tricked into thinking he was real. Well, he was at one time. When they asked the locals about it, the locals would casually point to the old picture and said, "Old Bill seems to like you." Sometimes people are happy about it, and other times, all they left was dust in their wake. Not all the ghosts are from this time period. We have some ghosts who are still dressed like they're from the 80s, boombox, mullets and all. It seems anyone who dies in the outback or in the town is drawn to coming here. It's reassuring in a way, knowing that they have somewhere to go. Sometimes you see some people who've been murdered. There was a British bloke and a man and his dog who came by. All of them had been lost at some point. It's interesting to see them all together, drinking and enjoying themselves, before it goes dead quiet in the morning. The only consistent thing being the aroma of dust on the floor and the sight of empty bottles. Most of the ghosts are pretty friendly to the living, so long as they are respectful and relaxed. Occasionally, though, we find them in pieces around the place. A leg here or there. They tend to blame it on the Australian wildlife, but we know what's coming. These ghosts are not welcome in town, and are left to wander the outback. If you ever hear moans and loud cries at night, you know it's best to run. So, yeah. Just remember, if you ever come out to the pub that time forgot, don't disrespect the ghosts, or you will be joining us.
Faceless and Glowing. Narrated by Creepypasta.
Okay, since it's Halloween time, I've been thinking about what I saw probably 9 years ago. I was about 19, and I was driving home late from a friend's house. I've driven on this road more times than any other, because it's the one directly outside my mum's neighborhood where I grew up. Nothing has ever happened to me there before. Just to give a visual, it's a slow, windy road with speed bumps. There have always been a couple of very old, almost shack-like homes. They're pretty dilapidated looking, and I've never seen anyone in them. And there's some very nice ones also, now mixed with a couple of small, $1 million subdivisions just in the back. The spirit I saw, it was standing on the grass, closest to one of the shack-like homes. I believe I saw it from the corner of my eye first, and then I turned my whole head to see it, and I will never forget what it looked like. Its body was glowing completely, wearing pants, possibly jeans, t-shirt, and a baseball-looking cap. Its face had no facial features. It was faceless and glowing white, like the rest of it. Even though I couldn't have possibly seen it for more than a few seconds, for some reason, I know that it was motionless. I was in shock, and I sped home so fast. Unluckily for me, my mum was out with friends, so I locked myself in my bedroom and I called her frantically to come home. I've tried to look up faceless or glowing spirits, but I never seem to find much. I wish I could understand what I saw. My gut tells me that it is definitely some kind of spirit, possibly someone who inhabited one of the homes, and somehow the energy built up in that moment to show himself as it was on Earth when he was alive. Has anyone seen anything like this before?
My Lucy Things. Narrated by Danie Dreadful.
I have mentioned in my first post I would tell you about this unexplainable incident that occurred in my 1920s home, and my son saw it happen as well. I have this cute little wire coat/hat rack that hangs from my wall in the entryway. I have a wall that my big china hutch is against and a small shelved cupboard next to it, and above that is the hat rack. The hat rack has some vintage fur stoles and a pair of vintage shoes 40s era, an antique umbrella, and a vintage hat, purse, and hanky, and some pins, pearls, and clip-on earrings displayed. I call them my Lucy things because I wore them as I was Lucy Ricardo from I Love Lucy for Halloween back in the past. I was in the kitchen. The doorway to the kitchen goes through the wall where these things are displayed. The umbrella is made of sterling silver with rhinestones at the end of the handle, and the top is a very long point. Well, the way I have it propped is, the base is diagonally down against the side of the hutch and the tip pointed up towards the top of the doorway that goes in the kitchen. These things are about a foot away from the doorway. I was coming out of the kitchen when the hat flew as if being thrown off the hat rack and landed about 3 feet in front of the rack. Too far away, I think. If I had just dropped down, it was thrown on the floor, and the pair of shoes flew at me, landing in the kitchen on the floor, not ricocheting off the door frame either, which might make them go around the corner, per se. And the umbrella shot down at me like a spear being chucked at me. All these items fell at the same time, but the way they fell and why and how is not reasonable. It was like more than one person threw them, like each item thrown by a different person, but all at the same time. The shoes actually went into the kitchen doorway, so it means they went around the corner in order to get in. The umbrella doesn't make sense how it had fallen. The heavy end is pointed down and the lowest position, so it was like someone had to have picked it up, lifted it to chuck it at me, and it was hard. It scared me. My son was coming out of the living room, which is connected to this entry room, and he saw it happen as I walked from the kitchen door into the entryway. I put everything back and we tried to debunk it, and threw a pair of weighted up socks as if we pitched it, and I didn't disturb the items. We shook them, and nothing even so much as quivered. We slammed the laundry door, which is behind that wall, and nothing. We can't figure it out. Just really weird, very cool to have experienced. So, how can it be possible for the shoe to land into the kitchen instead of in the front of the doorway? How did they get in the door? I don't know, but a friend had joked and said maybe Lucy is mad. I later found out that a couple with the last name of Ball used to live here in 1925, but I don't know any more on that yet. But thought, weird, that's Lucy's last name. Not that I think they are her family, but still, just kind of a funny odd thought.
H.E.B. Ghost. Narrated by DarqChylde Audio.
Hello everybody. It's been a while since I've been on this site. Due to school and stuff, I haven't had the time for internet. But I have a story to tell that happened recently over the past few weeks. I was with my mom in the car. We had just picked up a pizza from Little Caesars and were heading to H.E.B. to buy my little brother a cake, since it was his birthday. We got off to choose the cake and, we were just inspecting all the cakes they had on sale, seeing which one was the cheapest but most appetizing. We finally both came to the choice of the small rectangular chocolate cake for $8. Had it decorated in all the stuff and got ready to leave. I, for one, really needed to answer nature's call, so I decided to use the restroom in the store. I went into the bathroom, which for some reason was completely deserted and as creepily dark as a Halloween night. But this was an emergency, so I had to be brave. I switched on the lights, did my thing, and went to the sink to wash my hands. I turned on the faucet, washed my hands, and I'm a girl, so had to take a minute to check myself out in the mirror. Don't all you girls out there do that too? I looked into it for a minute, and then I could just make out the shape of a person's body standing a couple of feet away from me. I was paralyzed. I didn't know what to do until the person in the mirror started descending towards me slowly. At that, I screamed and ran out of there faster than you can say, scared as hell. This was the first experience that I had that had to do with me actually seeing something out of the ordinary. What do y'all think? Do you think that it's me being too obsessed about these things and then my head just creating weird shapes? Did I imagine this, or is there really the genuine spirit of a deceased person in that restroom? Any suggestions?
My Demonic Halloween Visitor. Narrated by Creepypasta.
I've heard a few of these encounters have happened, so it makes me feel not as crazy when I think about it. It was just a normal night at my grandparents' house. Normally, I'd stay over there for Halloween, since my dad worked. I was getting ready for bed, and as always, my grandma would shut my bedroom door so the lights would not bother me. I remember just laying there in my bed, excited to get dressed up and go trick-or-treating. But I started feeling really cold. Normally I slept with my blanket halfway on, leaving my feet and legs out of the blanket. As soon as I went to tuck my feet into the blanket, I felt something grab me. I went to scream, and I realized I couldn't. Now, also, so you know, even though my door was shut, light still shone through the top and the bottom. I looked towards the door, trying to yell out for my grandma, when suddenly, I saw the light disappear from the door, and something deep and just a heavy darkness came over my body. I felt like I was being choked as I kept trying to scream, and I still couldn't from whatever was holding me down, because I couldn't move from the bed to try to escape. But it did mumble something, as it felt like it was taking breath out of me. All I heard was, "Don't come." As soon as it said that, it disappeared. The light shone through the door cracks once more, and I was able to breathe and move. Still in a shock, I ran to my grandma and asked her if she heard me screaming for her. She looked shocked when I asked this and told me I should be getting ready for bed. I didn't even want to sleep in my room that night.
What I Saw. Written and narrated by Dark Little Voices.
I had spent the night at a friend's house to celebrate Halloween. There were Jolly Rancher shots, some s'mores made as an appetizer, pizza, and tons of beer. We celebrated with at least 5 other people who just didn't have plans for Halloween, but didn't want to stay home. It was honestly a great time, for the exception of almost choking on the pizza. That night, I barely remembered falling asleep. The last thing I remembered was that I went to blink after Travis, one of my friends at the party, told this hilarious joke about his ex-girlfriend. She really was a horrible person that only wanted him to get to his friends. So, the fact that he told us hilarious jokes about how much of a bullet he dodged not only made us laugh, but made us happy for him that he was finally getting over her. I was in a deep sleep on what I thought was the couch. However, The more that I sobered up, the more that it felt uncomfortable to move. I slowly opened my eyes to see if it was how I slept or something to that effect, as I kept hearing a drop of water and felt the cold air hit my face. As I woke up, I regretted it immediately, not just because I ended up puking, but because I was tied down with Ziplocs, and who I saw on the stairs. Caroline? Is that you?
What do you think?
She said in an almost demonic tone. Where am I? What the fuck is going on? I struggled to get free, but realized that there was no way out of it. She moved closer to me, with blood dripping down to the floor.
You ran me over, Jack. You then tried to bullshit that you weren't on the road that night. The courts might believe you, but...
She said, wagging her finger that had maggots crawling throughout it and other parts of her body.
You and I both know what happened. What really happened.
She said in an aggressive, demonic tone. At this point, I could smell rotting meat coming from her decaying corpse. Please, it was a mistake.
Oh, a mistake. You failing to accept being dumped, or drinking so much that you thought it would be hilarious to hit me with your shitty car, or perhaps burying me alive in some field and then pretending it never happened was the mistake? Personally, all three seem to be your last mistake.
She looked at me with her once beautiful, seductive eyes as her corpse sat on my lap. The fear that surged throughout my body was paralyzing, but not enough to ignore the pain of her sharp, jagged teeth that quickly dug into my neck as her sharp claws forced their way deep into my arms. I tried to scream for help, but I knew it was pointless. She whispered into my ear just before I died.
You taste as sweet as candy. How fitting on the only night that my soul could gain vengeance. Now, if only your soul didn't taste like shit.
And after that, everything went black.
Last Friday. Narrated by Lone Wolf.
I've heard of a place out here where I live. It's on one of the back roads of the Alaskan new-growth forests in one of these valleys. They say that if you drive down this road on a day when the sun is shining so brightly as to make everything appear black and white, then you might come across a girl walking along the side of the road. She is said to be easy to recognize, because whether it is summer or winter, she is always wearing a heavy wool overcoat and a set of oversized headphones, like those big skullcandy headphones you can find in stores. According to the story, if you drive up alongside her and roll down the window, you might hear her singing. The song, some people around here say, is Rezo Ceres's Gloomy Sunday. If you interrupt her, asking the question before she's finished the song, it is said that her answer will be, "I can't remember," and that in the next town that you enter, you will be arrested for the kidnap and murder of this girl. However, if you were to wait for her to finish and then ask the question, being, "When did it last snow?" and this is to be asked no matter what season it is, she will give you one of three possible answers. If she says, "Thursday," you will continue to drive ahead as if nothing has happened. But though you will be able to see and control your actions, it will be through a thick fog, as if you were asleep. You will live out the rest of your life in this empty dream state, and when you die, your soul will be condemned to a black emptiness. If the answer is today, then you are far more fortunate. You will continue on to your destination without event, and upon returning home, you will find that your greatest wish has been realized. However, if her answer is last Friday, then may whatever entity controls our fates have mercy on you. You will vanish for over a year. No one will have the slightest clue where you have gone, and your family, in despair, will give you up for dead. Then, on a Friday, during the following year's snowmelt, your body will be found hanging from an old black spruce in one of these swamps. Your face will have been eaten away, and your body in such a state of decay that you'll only be identified by your dental records. Your spirit, however, will be trapped, forced to walk that road every day when the sun is so bright that everything seems black and white. Now you might be asking how I know all this. I've never done this myself, only heard the stories. But I have also lived up here for most of my life, so I can tell you this honestly. 6 years ago, this entity was a little boy. Then, they found my sister.
A Scare in the Empty Flat. Narrated by the Sandman.
A Scare in the Empty Flat. So this happened recently on 18 October. I had gone to Lucknow for a meeting and was given the flat my uncle had rented for his residence. I had reached there around 5 p.m. The flat was an old one, but really spacious with big rooms. I loved the vibe of the place and called my friend who lived in the city to come hang out with me. We parted ways around 11 p.m. and I was all alone now, but was really tired with all the traveling, so I decided to sleep as I have to wake up early. The whole flat was on the first floor with big buildings around it with no wind, and all windows were closed as well. But I left my door slightly open so I could get some light in the bedroom from the hall. I don't remember the exact time, but I was awakened by a movement in the room. I did not make anything out of it and thought I had dreamt something and was lying on the bed with my face towards the door. All of a sudden, the door opened forcefully and stopped, making a 45-degree angle with the hinge, like someone forcefully opened it and stopped. I got scared and sat on the bed and switched open the night lamp on the bedside. I kept looking towards the door, but could not make anything out of what just happened. If it was wind, the door would not have opened halfway and had been given a full swing. But there was no wind. Monsoon hadn't reached there yet, and it was hot outside. I do not know the history of the place, and haven't told or asked anyone yet about this incident. But if it was paranormal, then it would be difficult for me, as I have to frequently visit the city for my business purpose and stay there until I get my own place. If anyone would help me to understand if they know anything about this.
Ghost in the Laundry Room. Narrated by Creepypasta.
Hello everyone. I recently put out a story about my friend from middle school coming to visit me. And, well, there was another time. However, this wasn't with my mother. It was with a guy who was a friend of hers and my ex-girlfriend. She and I were lying on the couch and watching TV. I heard a voice of some sort, and I looked over the back of the couch towards our basement hallway, and I watched this thing walk across our hallway with a sheet over its head, like something someone would do on Halloween. And at that point, I watched my mum's friend walk out of the bathroom behind it, his eyes wide open. His exact words were, "Get me a priest here now." I just watched a person under a sheet walk away from me and just drop in the laundry room. And to this day, That's one of the only stories I have that someone else witnessed in that house, besides my mother. And it was literally like something you'd see on Paranormal Activity.
Great-grandfather's visit. Narrated by Horror Over Coffee.
When I was little, my grandmother threw Halloween parties for my sister, cousin, and I. My great-grandfather never missed one, or any other family occasion for that matter. Anyway, when I was in kindergarten, he passed away. He was in his 70s. It was a very sad time for our family. At his funeral, I felt something. It was as if I was being watched. I don't know if any other family members experienced this because I never asked. I still believe it was him. Back to the Halloween parties. He loved them so much. He practically had as much fun as us kids had. When I was in first grade, the creepy stuff started. It was almost a year after he died, about 10 months. 2 days before Halloween, my grandmother threw her party. My cousin wasn't born yet, so it was just my sister, a friend from across the street, and I. All of us felt very uneasy at the party. Here's the really freaky thing. My gram got the pictures developed, and in 2 photos was his figure. In one you could make out his face. This really freaked me out, and my sister and friend kept teasing me about it. It took us about 4 months until February to come up with a conclusion for the strange happenings. We all decided it was him paying a visit from the beyond.
I saw a shadow and nobody was there. Narrated by 242 Reads.
This happened around Halloween in 2017. I was with a group of friends and we were chilling in the backyard of one of the friends. Things were going good for a while, just normal middle school discussion and occasional doll in the window. The friend had a little brother who was inside the house at the time, so there was no way the doll is related to anything. Then, at about 8 to 8:30 p.m., I saw a shadowy figure of a man wearing a hat appear on the house, moving towards one of the friends that was there. I looked behind me, and there was nobody there. It was just darkness. I asked if anyone saw that, and there was only one person that didn't. It makes sense that the rest of us were pretty freaked out, so we moved to the driveway. Then, the friend that didn't see it made her way around the house. She reported that she didn't see or hear anything paranormal. All the other people did not want to go back there, which makes sense. So, afterwards, there was no other explanation or anything paranormal. That was the only thing that happened that night. I know what I saw was real, and there was 2 other people who saw it with me. One thing worth noting, though, is that one of my friends who was there claims that she's a type of medium. She can sense when there's a spirit in the area. She recalls that one time she had a knife thrown at her by an angry spirit. And, after the incident, she says there was an energy in the area. And when we saw the shadow, it was moving towards her. So, that's my little experience. I give you the truth. Do what you will.
Glowing Eyes on Halloween Night. Narrated by Grimm Reads.
This one isn't super long and may not be very scary to most, but it stuck with me for a long, long time. So, here it goes. It was Halloween night, I think 2014. Once again, in my hometown of Richmond, Kentucky, my cousin, his girlfriend, and myself had been riding around and went out to get some candy to hand out to trick-or-treaters when they came. We decided to take a shortcut back to his place, since we kind of got a late start because we lost track of time. It was around 6:45 p.m. and the sun was going down, which didn't help the fact that the road we took, Old Crutcher Pike, is dark, kind of creepy, and very crooked and narrow already. We turned down the road, turned on the headlights, and headed towards his house, which was about 2 miles away. It seemed to get darker the further down the road we got, probably because there weren't very many houses or lights around. I decided to roll the window down. It was particularly warm for October, around 63 degrees. Kentucky weather is crazy like that. So now with the window down, I am paying more attention as we pass by what few houses there are. We come across a couple of mobile homes next to one another. One with a carport, and directly across the road was a small, dilapidated shack. Then I saw it, and by the look on my cousin's face and the sudden hurry to get off that road, he did too. Under the carport, at the back of 2 cars as we drove by, we saw a man in black slacks with a white old-timey shirt and a black vest and cane, standing beside a woman with a white lace-lined dress and a bonnet, just standing there staring at the shack with big, glowing eyes that looked like reflectors. We got about 3 football fields away and pulled over. We both looked at each other and said, "Did you see what I saw?" We talked about it and both agreed we had, so we turned back around and drove by in the opposite direction and saw nothing when we passed by the house. We turned around, left the road, and went to his house and ended up eating way too much candy because the kids had already stopped for the night. I believe what I saw was real, and I know that he does too. But for anyone who has a logical approach, I can't say it couldn't have been a setup. But if it was fake, just to scare people, then move or something, it was a very, very good one. Also worth mentioning that the land my cousin lived on and all around there was known for being an Indian burial ground and really old farmland.
The Dark, Tall Presence. Narrated by Creepypasta.
When I was 15, myself, my best friend, and my girlfriend, we went to see a scary movie, The Grudge. It was the day before Halloween, and I was thoroughly freaked out after. Thankfully, my best friend had spent the night because, well, we were both super freaked out. I felt like I was being watched, and I felt uneasy. I chalked it up to the movie. The next evening, we were in my bathroom, getting ready for Halloween. When you're looking into the mirror, with the bathroom door open, you could see into my oldest brother's bedroom. He wasn't home, and his door was wide open. It was getting dark out, and we had the hallway light and the bathroom light on. We were both looking into the mirror, doing face paint and whatnot, and at the exact same time, we looked at each other and we said, "Did you see that?" We both saw a dark, tall shadow glide across my brother's doorway, and we both felt like we were being watched. I'd been feeling like that for a few minutes, but after this, it became much more intense. We quickly gathered our stuff and ran downstairs to the other bathroom. My bedroom, it was right next to my brother's room, so I really didn't want to go back up there after that. I was finally able to settle down and go to sleep later that night. but I had an awful dream. I always slept with my door closed, so in my dream, I woke up and looked over to see a very tall shadow figure open my door and stand in the doorway. After a moment, it began to glide towards me, and just as it got to my bed, I woke up. I looked over, and my door was wide open, so I was very freaked out. I don't think I went back to sleep that night. After that, I never saw any shadow people directly. I would think I would see something out of the corner of my eye, but that was all. Sometimes I got the feeling I was being watched, and I still get that feeling from time to time when I visit my parents' house. I think whatever I saw was feeding off the fear of me and my friend. If my friend hadn't seen it too, I probably would have assumed I was just freaked out because of that movie. I'm not sure if having someone there to validate what I saw made me feel better or worse.
The Man Who Caught Me. Narrated by Phoenix Fire.
This happened October of 2012 in Salem, Oregon. I was 12 at the time and in middle school. It was Halloween. School just got out and I went to a friend's house to put on costumes and prepare for the night. I didn't need makeup for my costume. I just wore a witch's hat and cape. So I decided to go and play on the swing in the backyard. Before I went outside, their parents left to go pick up dinner and told us they would be back sometime soon. My two friends with me went to go get ready shortly after that. Then I was left alone outside. I went to go sit on the swing. It was getting cold and the sun was close to setting. As I began to swing, it got really quiet. Almost eerily quiet. This went on for about 20 minutes or so. I could only hear the wind passing through the leaves of the trees and the occasional bird, which was odd. Even though they lived near the woods, there were still quite a few people in the surrounding area. It was so quiet and peaceful that I started to slip and fall back. As I fell, I felt strong hands on my back push me back up onto the swing, and then a hand patted my shoulder. I glanced over, looking for the force behind the sudden touch. It was large and seemed to be worn out. I said thank you. Then a man replied. He sounded old and almost a little raspy. He told me to be more cautious and aware of my surroundings. I turned to say something more, and he was gone. I stood up and looked around. To my surprise, no one was there. Then I looked to my left towards the garage. I assumed it was my friend's father, that he had passed by as it happened, then caught me on his way to work on his car. I walked into the garage and it was empty. Lights were off as well. I then checked the back gate. It was locked, unable to be unlocked or even locked for that matter from the other side. I decided to go back into the house to see if my friends were done. I went to the bathroom and asked if their parents were back. She told me no, they haven't come back yet. Might not be for a while. I began to tell them about how a man caught me on the swing. We went and searched around outside and there was no evidence of someone getting into the backyard. They told me to stop playing around and to just go back outside. I swore up and down I wasn't lying. I told only the truth. They got fed up with me and went back inside the house. I still think about that night. Remember the hands catching me, the voice, and even the footsteps fading away. To this day, neither of them believe me. Not many others I tell do either.
The Bingham Light on Halloween Night. Narrated by Scare Me.
I haven't posted on this site in a long time, mainly because I haven't had any recent experiences aside from maybe one earlier this year, or last year I think. However, that changed this past Halloween, so I just wanted to give an update on another experience with the Bingham Light. I went out to the community of Bingham to attempt to see the light this past Halloween. It was obviously the perfect time to go. I was expecting to see a crowd of people out there, given the occasion, but to my surprise, I only saw one or two other cars, and they were only driving through the location and then left. By the time I had gotten down the mile-long dirt road, S. Butler Road, I was the only one out there. Nothing spectacular happened that night. I just got out of the car and did the usual call. "Bingham Light, come out!" As always, it was pretty creepy out there, but I had been out there so many times that I became quite accustomed to it by now. I think the scariest part about being out there is the darkness itself, along with the remoteness of the area. The light in and of itself is nothing scary. It's just knowing what it is that gets to you. The crops in the field was growing up to maybe a foot, and I noticed there were 2 cotton trucks parked on the opposite sides of the field. I stood there maybe 20-something minutes, calling the light and looking around me at all times. I asked it to reveal itself in a way that wouldn't scare me. It wasn't much long after that when I noticed right dead in the middle of the field I saw a faint flash low to the ground. It took a second for my eyes to really adjust to what I was looking at, but given my previous experiences I quickly realized that it was the light. It was moving towards me at a fairly quick pace, in its usual side-to-side motion. Within seconds it was only a few yards away from me. I quickly ran to my car and tore out of there. The thing about this light is that it's so faint that you really don't realize what you're seeing until it's nearly right upon you. That's the scary part about it. A lot of people, and I do mean a lot, have exaggerated the appearance of the light over the years, but on a handful of occasions I've seen the light. It showed itself as a soft faint bluish illumination that flashed side to side. Never anything like a hard and bright light, like car lights or a flame. It's not even as bright as a firefly illumination, and there are tons of those out there in the warm months, so that alone has unknowingly confused many, I'm sure. But I digress at this point. Anyway, I left S. Butler Road and took a left onto Highway 34 to drive another mile or so around to Reedy Springs Court, which is another dirt road. The whole area is connected, so Reedy Springs Court runs parallel to S. Butler Road. Imagine something along the lines of a big rectangle, and you sorta got the picture. I got down Reedy Springs Court, turned my car around and parked at the point where 2 dirt roads intersect. At first I got out the car and made a call, but it began to dawn on me just how creepy that area was. I thought the area around the crop field on S. Butler Road was creepy, but Reedy Springs Court is just outright dreadful on a dark night. I couldn't stand it out there any longer. I quickly got back in my car and rolled the passenger window down and made the call to the light. I made sure to look around me at all times, as that particular area is where the light is known to come up on you close and fast, though it never happened to me yet. After several minutes I didn't see anything, and I wasn't about to wait around much longer either. I was getting creeped out by the minute, so I had to go. Although not much happened that night, I can say that I finally did get to see the light again after so long. After all, considering I had 50-something visits, I've only ever seen the light maybe 5 or 6 times in the span of 10 years. I'm glad to know that the ghost light of Bingham still exists.
Dead Man's Light. Narrated by Creepypasta.
So, I live in a small, compact community where everyone knows everyone and everything about everyone. Across the road from me, an alcoholic man passed away a couple of months ago in his house. His mother owns the house and hasn't started renting it to anyone yet. On the odd occasion, she will drive back to check on the house. We know she is there when her car is outside. She never comes out of the house with anything, and there hasn't been any moving vans or anything like that. So basically, it's a well-known fact that the house is vacant and has been since he died. He has no sibling or anyone who would occupy or visit the house. So, recently, I have noticed that the living room light will turn on and off at random times. For example, early hours of the morning. Our whole street has started to talk about it. It may be possible that the light is on a timer, but as I've said, these times are random. We've been recording the times that we've noticed it turn on and off for a while now, and there's no pattern to it. Since the man has passed away for a while, I highly doubt there would still be electricity in the house. I thought that this was the perfect thread to post this story. Me and my friend, we've walked past the window, checking if we can see anyone, and we haven't. It's starting to freak me out, and a couple of the neighbors. Does anybody have any possible answers? Update. I've been informed on Halloween, the light was on, and some kids knocked on the door to trick or treat. There was no answer. G'day guys, Creepy Oz here. Firstly, I'd like to give a huge thank you to all the amazing narrators who joined me on this one and made this Halloween mega collab possible. Secondly, thank you to you, the listener, especially if you're still listening right now, all the way at the end. You rock. What did you guys think? Did you have a favorite story or favorite narrator? Be sure to let us know in the comments down below. And last but not least, I'd like to wish everyone
a happy Halloween.